Welcome to Board Game Animal. My name is Justin, and we're going to close the year off strong because it's finally time for us to deliver the most overdue video of ours yet. My favorite board game designer of all time is Dr. Reiner Knizia. Record-setting, legend of the hobby, possible alien Reiner Knizia. We've actually made quite a few videos now about his games, most of which were perpetuating the joke that our pets befriended Kid Knizia, and subsequently were the inspiration for why there are so many animal-themed Knizia reprints. A joke that has snowballed to the point, much to our amazement, that the good doctor himself appeared in our most recent video about it, taking the joke even farther. He's a really awesome guy. What's crazy is even with all these videos, we've never actually shared our favorite Knizia games. Oops. Well, enough talking about it. We're going to quickly have a couple honorable mentions, briefly talk about 25 through 11, and take a few minutes to talk about my top 10 Knizia games. So let's get right to it. Two quick honorable mentions. These kind of pained me that they didn't make it into the top 25, so I wanted to take a moment, hype them up, and explain why. Firstly is Butterfly Garden. This is the Knizia game that we most recently played for the first time. I've played the least, but we still really enjoyed it. It's a reprint of Indigo, which I haven't previously played, that is coming out from Capstone in 2025. We were fortunate enough to get a copy at PAX. It's a really satisfying tile placement, route building experience, and I really love the fluttering butterfly theme put on it. It's a really thinky, cerebral game that also feels really relaxing to play. A really great game for your kind of quiet cup of tea sort of night. So when this one becomes available, I highly recommend checking it out. And secondly, for honorable mentions, is Viking Seesaw, which really is just some outrageous fun. A really wonderful little dexterity game where you're trying to balance out a literal seesaw that's represented by a Viking ship. Different bits and bobs of different shapes and weights. I think it's because at the end of the day, dexterity games fall a little bit lower for me in general. That's why it didn't crack into the top 25, but I really love Viking Seesaw, and it actually is one of the highest rated dexterity games for me personally, and so I think if you get an opportunity to play this one, it is a lot of fun and you should check it out. Number 25 is Cat Blues The Big Gig, the latest Knizia output from Bitewing Games. Cat Blues is a really unique little amalgamation of a rummy-like card play where you're melding cards that you've won in a unique, tight little auction system. I think there's a lot of depth and creativity to Cat Blues, and I can't wait to keep playing it. I can assure you the only reason it's so low on my list is because we've had so little time with it so far, kind of like Butterfly Garden. But I'm enjoying it a ton, so I'm really looking forward to watching this grow even on my own list. So the Big Gig, this newest version of Cat Blues from Bitewing, definitely check this one out. Number 24 is Through the Desert. And I know, 24? I'd like to lead by saying there's a reason that it's this low. It only is because another Knizia game, which you'll see a little later, has kind of consumed it for me in a way. However, if I want a straightforward classic experience, I still will always go with Through the Desert. It's fantastic. A common highlight of this list will be pointing out how elegantly and efficiently Knizia will take a certain concept, mechanism, or game itself and do his own iteration or distillation of it into a really nice streamlined experience. And usually in a really clever, inventive way that I often call his work to be the definitive game of said topic. Through the Desert essentially is that for Go, but with camels. No matter what, with any other new games that come out, I'll always have a sweet spot for it. If you've never played Through the Desert, there is a new version out from Allplay. You should definitely give it a try. Modern Art is one of Knizia's iconic auction games. What's really cool about this game is it's a brilliant implementation of using multiple kinds of auctions all in one game, all while manipulating a constantly changing in-game economy. And the fact that the whole point is to be making money, and I think that's a very familiar concept for people, as well as having an approachable theme of artwork and art museums. I'm an art lover personally, and I think it just makes for an easy experience to teach people this game. It's something you can share with just about anyone. I've personally had success playing it with family and friends outside of the hobby, and I've always had such a great time with it. A very definitive auction game from Knizia. Notice not I didn't say the definitive auction game. We'll get to that one later, because the word auction is one you're gonna hear a lot in this video. Number 22 is Winner's Circle. Winner's Circle to me is just super ingenious. You're going to place bets on horses and then be rolling dice to manipulate the race. I'm a big fan of games where everyone can manipulate everything. It's not just your own pieces that you can control. If you play Downforce, it's kind of that sort of thing, where in Downforce you're manipulating all the cars. In Winner's Circle, you'll have a chance to manipulate any one of the horses, even the ones that your opponents are gunning for. You're rolling dice, activating different abilities on different horses based on what you rolled on the dice. It can be loud, fun, a little bit take that, but it's somehow still super balanced and really fun and really fast to play. I highly recommend this. If you like racing and betting games, I think this is one of the cleanest designs out there that does that. 21 is Huang. Yes, yep, I know. This is indeed my stand-in for Iello and Yangtze, Tigris and Euphrates, and the whole lot, since it's a re-implementation of that series. All absolutely astounding games, and I'll explain why they are collectively so relatively low on this list, before I get the other Knizia fans chasing me down. I love playing Huang, but at the end of the day for me, it has a certain element and a certain vibe that registers the same for me as chess. It's a game that at the end of the day, I feel is a work of art. And in a way is just a bit above me, things considered. I personally feel like if I went through all of the games I've ever played, the whole Tigris and Euphrates Huang situation is one of the biggest disparities between the level at which I play the game and the level at which it can be played. But regardless of that fact, I still super enjoy it. It's iconic. It's a great experience to bring to the table. It has awesome presence, really great interactions between all the players, and is just an elegant tile placement game that I understand why it has such legendary status in the hobby. Ultimately, I think everyone at some point should play a game in this series, and Huang is currently available and is a wonderful, wonderful production. Here's one that may surprise people. Number 20 is Tutankamun. I really enjoy Tutankamun. It's a drafting set collection game that has the really unique element of the fact that you're playing on this long, winding modular board of a river of tiles. And as you're playing, you can travel as far down as the snake as you want to draft something, but then after that, you can never go backwards. It makes for a really, really neat table presence with the shape of this board, but it also creates a great dynamic between everyone playing. Trying to weigh the pros and cons of every jump across the river of tiles to try to figure out if you're making the right decision. And to make sure you get the best you can while simultaneously making sure you don't pass anything you should get while also not opening up the opportunity for other players to get what they need. I think this is a very underrated Knizia game and one that feels very different from literally any other one on this list. And I know this version is still readily available. I think it's definitely worth checking out. Tutankamun. Number 19 is My City, which was actually the first legacy game that Kelly and I completed together. This one really brings back a lot of fun memories for me of that whole experience. It's a really great puzzly time, and to this day, it's one of my favorite polyomino games. It's great when you play with just kind of the permanent standalone non-legacy version of the game. But I believe playing through the campaign, unlocking the different scoring opportunities, the different mechanisms is really cool to get through and experience opening the different things. And as far as scale is concerned, I think it's an excellent legacy game that isn't overwhelming in the amount of content. It's still a very reasonable sized box and what's in there. So if you've never given My City a try, I say go for it. It's a really rewarding, satisfying experience. Number 18 is Amun Re. It's kind of a cool outlier here because in a way, I feel like Amun Re is a bit of the grandest game that's on this list. You're working on this massive area majority game while obtaining those things through really unique auctions that are unlike the auctions in any of the other Knizia games on this list. But on top of the uniqueness of the auction, the game itself just has a lot of moving parts that feature cards and a full board reset halfway through the game. It's really big in both the scope in general and the table presence itself. It's a Knizia classic that, of a lot of the games on this list, it's one that I don't get to the table very often, and I hope to in the near future. But if you haven't had a chance to play Amun Re, this is another one that is a classic that has recently been made available in a new production. And if you like the variety and the different auction stuff that Knizia does in his games, this is one to check out because it's a very dynamic system. Number 17 is Circus Flati. We did a whole video on Circus Flati somewhat recently, so I'll keep this brief. This is just one of those perfect little numbers and colors on cards games. That is just yet another tremendous example of how well Knizia knows how to make push your luck games. It feels like a really classic card game with modern sensibilities. Really excellent all around, and check out our other video on it if you want more details, but I highly recommend Circus Flati. I really like On Guard. I actually feel a little bad for putting it as low on this list that I did. It's a very simple to learn and to play hand management, tug of war sort of game where all you're trying to do is get your fencer to hit the other. It's a great little two-player game that may at times feel even too simple or too chancy. But the speed of the game and the constant choice of weighing the options of what cards you're going to play makes the game really replayable and kind of weirdly thematic with the back and forth fencing. For me, it strikes the chord of those kind of games that feel older than they are. It feels like something you could almost see in a period piece, and there's something about that quality that kind of endears it to me. And at the end of the day, it's just a quick to play little two-player game that has a lot of cool little decisions and a really cool, unique little theme that I think deserves more notoriety. On Guard. Millie Fury may be one of the least Knizia feeling games that's on this list, despite being mathematically perfect in every way. It's a massive point salad-y kind of game. You basically feel like you're playing multiple little area majority, pattern building mini games. It actually, in a way, kind of feels like you're gluing together a bunch of little micro Knizia math games. Ultimately, it makes for a really nice time. And the game is absolutely gorgeous. Just another masterpiece in general from Devir. I know there's an expansion that I've yet to try out, but I'm very interested in it because this game is already really fantastic and I'd love to see what else gets added to it. Even just in its base state, Millie Fury is excellent, and if you haven't given this a try of Knizia's modern games, you really should give it a chance. You know, there's a reason I once sang a parody of Desperado about El Dorado. It's awesome. Knizia's iteration on deck building that adds racing across a modular map of the jungle. It's just really fun. Somehow, despite having meeples on a hex board, it still makes you feel like you're going on an adventure. It feels more like a race than most vehicle racing board games, and has an ingenious changing card market for the deck building side of things. Just an awesome game from every angle, and I really hope at some point to get the Vincent to Trade art version, and I know that there's the expansion boxes that are coming out for that. Really exciting because El Dorado already packs a lot of punch in just the base game, a lot of variability with the maps, and if you like deck building or racing, give El Dorado a try. 13 is Lost Cities, and I feel like an absolute criminal putting it this low. I told you this list was very hard to make. Lost Cities is just a ridiculously good two-player game where you're constantly weighing the odds and managing your hand to make the most efficient expeditions possible. All you're doing is just playing different colored cards in their respective lanes. Just a tremendous, iconic game from Dr. Knizia. I love it. And I just have two quick side notes on it. The first of which is that Lost Cities is actually one of two Knizia games that are actually the top two board games for my father, period. Fortunate that my dad's in our game group, and I think it's super cool that the love of Knizia games seems to run in the family a bit. Second side note is a little bit of a cheat here as an honorable mention is Lost Cities The Rivals. These are very, very different games. They're somehow almost interchangeable for me personally. Sometimes I want that just exquisitely clean, classic, brilliant, the original Lost Cities on its own. But if I want a little bit of iconic Knizia auction sensibilities thrown in and at a bigger player count, sometimes I'd like to play Lost Cities The Rivals. But for me, mentally, they scratch the same itch. So Rivals is also a stupendous little game and a massive cheat for me including it at this point. But that's all. Lost Cities, really fun in all its shapes and sizes. Shoton Totten, or Battle Line, is another brilliant little two-player card game that just beats out Lost Cities for me, but it's super, super, super close. You're playing cards from your hand in order to claim rocks that form the central line of the game, and you're doing it with poker-like card combinations of ascending strength. And you're just doing this to see who has the better sets on the different sides. But one of the things I personally love about this game is that you can claim a side even if there's not enough cards technically in play to have won, if you can deduce and prove based on the numbers that are in play that there is no mathematical way for your opponent to win that specific lane. It's a really, really clever little game, and I just love Shoton Totten. Really easy to pick up and play again and again and again. And apparently there's an Animal Re-themed version of it too. a little suspicious. All right, so Harry, make some notes. I need to get this one.
Yeah, absolutely. You got it.
Ah, there you are, Cascadero from Bitewing. You, the little troublemaker, that's the reason why Through the Desert is so low on this list. No, 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 no. At the end of the day, it's very different. But for me personally, not to reuse a phrase, but it scratches that same itch in my brain. Bitewing is like really just the kings of Knizia publishers at the moment. Keep knocking it out of the park with everything they're making. See, making this list was really, really difficult for me because there would be games down in the 30s and 40s and farther in the Knizia list that I'm like, I really like this game and I want to include it, and I feel bad for not. The reason I'm mentioning this at this point is because of Bitewing and a lot of their smaller Knizia games that just missed this list. Cat Blues, that I did mention earlier, is just kind of the latest in the list of these small Bitewing Knizia games. But they're all a lot of fun, and you really should check them out if you get the opportunity. And again, the reason why I struggled with leaving some of them off the list is Soda Smugglers didn't make my top 25 Knizia games, right? However, a close friend of mine who's not in the hobby but ends up playing a lot of hobby games with us absolutely loves Soda Smugglers and has said it's his favorite game of all time. And the experiences that we've had playing it are some of the most memorable gaming experiences I've had in the past few years, period. So there is so much that I love and appreciate about Knizia's catalog, even with these games that didn't make the top 25. But I seriously digress because we were talking about Cascadero. As mentioned, it really scratches those kind of playing on a hex grid, tile placement, route building, connection itches, but it adds tracks. And I love tracks in games. I will be mentioning this game again in a little video tomorrow that's called the top games of 2024, but you'll have to wait and check that one out tomorrow. Number 10 is Nightmare Productions, and surprise, surprise, it's another Knizia auction game. It's absolutely delightful. It's a closed economy that makes every single interaction and bid at the table so interesting. You're making movies in every version of this game, and the latest one here is about making monster movies specifically. But what you're doing is you're auctioning to make movies in varying degrees of quality by auctioning off directors, monsters, locations, composers, things like that to put together and make a movie. It's a really satisfying experience that actually does feel very different than Knizia's other auction games. And in general, I think it's a real treat of a game if you like games with closed economies, if you like unique auction styles that everyone is invested with at every turn, if you're just a big movie fan. Number 9 is High Society. And no, it's not just because our frog Mickey is right on the cover of this printing. It's not for that reason at all. No, no, no. I'm joking. Really. Oh, wow. Another auction game from Knizia. And yet another one that feels drastically different. If you've never played any Knizia games and you're like, wow, he's mentioned auctions a lot. I don't even know if I like auction games. You might want to do a little deeper digging on some of these games, or please feel free to ask us questions below, because every one of them is very different. And depending on how long of a game you want to play, how many people you want to play with, what kind of dynamic do you want around the table? Do you want it to be pure auction or do you want other elements involved? All of these are factors, and all of these games feel and play very, very differently. It's really fascinating to me how Knizia can take one mechanism and iterate on it in so many different lanes, make them all equally interesting, good, and entertaining. But of all of these auction games, High Society is the little small box game. It's really easy to teach and play this one. One thing I adore about Knizia in a lot of his games, I haven't gone into the detail of it too much on some of the games in this list, but there's usually what I like to call a bit of a Knizia twist in games, something you're not expecting that adds another level of depth to the thought process while you're playing it. It's something that changes the dynamic of the play, but it's normally ingenious and kind of brilliant, but really subtle and simple at the same time. In High Society, what that is the fact that you are auctioning and you're trying to spend money to gain the most points. But at the end of the game, if you've spent a lot of money and you've gotten a lot of really great things, if you're the person at the table who has the least amount of money left in your hand, you're disqualified from scoring at all. You're just out of the game. And it's such a fascinating element to add to an already really clever game. And that decision space now that's around every auction you play, because you're like, I really want the good thing, but I also don't want to be left with the least amount of money. Really interesting. High Society, in all its forms, is just wonderful. Number 8 is Royal Visit. This one and number 6 on this list are the two that I think are going to surprise the people Royal Visit is a clever, push and pull, hand management little game. Different pieces have different abilities, and ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the king over into your side of the board. It can be a little bit chancy, but I actually think the game has a lot of really good tension and is fast enough that it's fun to quickly turn back and replay. On Guard and Royal Visit really highlights the fact that Knizia does these tug of war games really well, but they don't get talked about as often as I think they should. Well, just kind of an underrated mechanism of his. I think Royal Visit does that tug of war thing really well, but also spices it up with the different abilities of the pieces that are in question and having multiple pieces on the board in general. And it's all in this one little gorgeous looking package in this yellow version. And I feel like I know Royal Visit is not one that everyone enjoys as much as some of the others I've already mentioned on this list, but for me, it's just such a great game in a small package that I don't think is talked about a lot. And I really enjoy it. So Royal Visit. Medici, you wouldn't happen to be an auction game, would you? Oh, an auction game for 2 to 6 players? Medici is such an intriguing experience, and yet again, very different from his other auction games. Man, do I sound like a broken record in this list. Are auction games Is auctions my favorite mechanism in games? Ultimately, Medici is kind of a multi-layered exercise in risk management. Your bidding power or money is also your available pool to bid with, but it's also what you want to have at the end of the game. So you're constantly weighing if any bid you make is worth the immediate sacrifice you're making. Additionally, the lots that you're bidding on can vary in size and the quality. And when you're the one who's adding the cards to bid on, you're constantly wondering, kind of in a well of anxiety, will adding one more card be useless to me? Will it entice my opponent to outbid me? Or could it be exactly what I'm looking for and help contribute to me winning the game? There's so much cleverness in this design, tension it builds on everyone's turns, watching people add to the pot. I don't think that Medici gets the love and attention that it deserves. Also, this is the second Knizia game that is in my father's top 2, alongside Lost Cities. So again, I think that's super cool, sharing the love of Knizia games in the family. This is the other game that I feel like it might surprise people being this high on the list. Blue Moon has always felt to me like Knizia's iteration on a trading card game, or CCG, but the nature of it from a hobby perspective is that it's actually the first LCG. Because there were no boosters, no random purchases, you just added preformed decks that you could get separately into this game. But it just feels like a CCG because you have a unique deck and it's a 2-player game that you're battling against each other. And you have unique powers and you're trying to gain control and all that. It's got a lot of clever hand management stuff, powers on cards. That's the kind of stuff I love. And it just gives those really satisfying trading card game vibes. All in a really succinct little package here originally. But one thing that's kind of a grail game for me is Blue Moon Legends, because I only have the original printing of the game here and not all the different races involved. So at some point I'd like to get that because I think the variety in gameplay in Blue Moon is just a really underrated thing that Knizia has done. And really cool that for someone known for all the auction games or Euro games and things of that nature, that he really excels at a little trading card game-like experience as well. Top 5 time, folks. Number 5 for me is Rapido, or as many know it as Escape. It is such a first-rate little push-your-luck game. If you want a quick game where you're rolling dice, racing up the board, taking chances, all to try to get to the finish line before anyone else. I love Knizia's games that have that high chance element, but offer so much mitigation in the balance of your decisions when you make a reasonable choice, coupled with the temptation that odds are I can keep going. I think this is the best distillation of that push your luck element by itself. You'll see why I say by itself in a minute. And I think that this would be a hit with a huge, various audience. Gamers, non-gamers. It's just something that's really easy and enticing to bring out to game night and say, hey, let's just roll some dice and do a little race. And who doesn't want to roll a dice with 7 pips on one side? I really hope this one becomes more readily available because it's the kind of game everybody should have, and I think it would be considered a modern classic if it was more readily available. Such a spectacular little game. Number 4 is the one and only Poison. We recently did a whole video on Poison, and I highly suggest you checking that out if you want some in-depth thoughts on it. The short form explanation is that I think Poison is the small numbers and colors on cards game that everyone should own. People know Uno, people know Phase 10, things like that, but Poison is genuinely a really good game that somehow will fit that vibe that's really approachable for people who aren't into hobby games but know this mass market card games like those. It is so fun, really lively engagement around the table, and filled with clever little decisions throughout. In our video, we called it Knizia's most underrated game for a reason. I think this game is one that all gamers and non-gamers alike should be familiar with. Poison. Number 3 is Blue Moon City. My experience with Blue Moon City is actually a really interesting one. In other videos on our channel, I've mentioned here and there, kind of falling for a game sometimes before even playing it, just from reading the rules. Some few games, after reading the rulebook, just clicked with me on a personal level, in a way that even before playing, I knew they were masterpieces. At least for me in my book. And I think that, for me, Blue Moon City was the time that happened the strongest and maybe most sincerest. The first time that I read the rules, I legit stopped and stared at them for a minute. I said, is this a perfect game? I just love the mechanisms and the way things are implemented. I actually feel that the hand management element of Blue Moon City, the different powers in the cards, and the fact that you're moving around trying to contribute to these little area majority things of rebuilding the destroyed city and balancing all of these decisions and all of these things that you're doing somehow simultaneously feels really modern for a game that's almost 20 years old at this point, but somehow also feels extremely retro, really classic of a game. Even when you have it on the table, it feels really old school. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, or maybe it's just the general smoothness of the design, the ingenuity of it all. I'd even go as far as to say that the game just feels graceful and elegant in the decisions that you're making. All in all, I think Blue Moon City is a stellar game that humorously pains me to put it so low at the number 3 spot. The 25th Century Games version of Ra is absolutely remarkable. I'd actually call the marriage of this game and 25th Century's printing to be the most just luxurious game of all time in one package, and I don't even have the fancy Pharaoh edition of it. I can't begin to explain how tricky ranking this and what you're about to see as number 1 were. They're almost interchangeable in my book. It is that close. I adore Ra, which is saying something when you hear what I have to say about my number 1. But Ra is just great. By this point, many of you know how splendid of a game itself is, and the not just beauty, but the practicality and usability of this version, whether it's the scoring reminders, the quality of the pieces, how everything just looks on the table. It's just like nothing else. It's mathematically sublime. Easily the best auction game out there. I'm actually really intrigued to see what the expansion and the other little bits and bobs brings to it later on in 2025. Very excited to be adding that stuff to my collection. But even in just base Ra, auction and bidding mechanisms, the set collection, the push your luck elements. Like I said earlier, Knizia distills and perfects mechanisms. And I really don't think any other game in the hobby does any one of these mechanisms better than Ra, much less all 3 of them in one package. Much less all of them in a game that is this easy to teach, this easy to play, that is richly fun, engaging at every moment of the game for every person around the table. Just elegantly classic. Well, geez, if Ra's the best game in all of those categories, what could possibly be number 1? Some of you know me, and some of you may have just guessed it. Number 1 is Zoo Vadis. Zoo Vadis is not only my favorite Knizia game, but it is also currently my favorite board game of all time. And yes, based on the comments I mentioned during Ra, that would make Ra my second favorite board game of all time because the two are constantly in contention with each other for that top spot. But let me explain why Zoo Vadis is number 1. What's wild about this for me is that if you looked at Zoo Vadis compared to, say, my other top 25 board game of all time, period, it is nothing like anything else on that list. Its lack of similarity to any of my other highly regarded games makes it a unicorn in my collection. Even since last year, my take on the game has skyrocketed exceptionally. But yes, Zoo Vadis is that perfect distillation of negotiation as a game mechanism. On your turn, you'll either manipulate the board space in some way by moving a non-player piece, or adding a new piece to the board, or most commonly trying to move one of your pieces forward by having the majority vote of the folks in the same space your piece currently resides. And that's where the negotiation part comes in. This is another one of those games that has that classic Knizia twist, because while you're progressing, trying to get towards the finish line area of the game, you are collecting victory points in the form of laurels of different values. Whoever has the most laurels at the end of the game wins. Simple, right? But the twist comes in the fact, no matter how many laurels you've collected over the course of the game, if you actually haven't made it into that final section of the board, your points mean nothing. They are only counted if you make it into that last section. And that's just absolutely brilliant. And another clever amount of depth to weigh in the balance of every deal and decision you make while playing this game. I have realized that the only common thread across all of my favorite board games is the fact is they create incredible nuance and interpersonal dynamics amongst the folks at the table very quickly. That's what they all have in common, and none do it better than Zoo Vadis. The interactions amongst the players and the situations that they create are exciting or rowdy or thought-provoking, tense or perplexing, or some combination of multiples of those. Discussions and deals and backstabbing happening around the table always make the game lively and somewhat downright hysterical. We once had a game where a friend of ours promised his vote to help someone else progress further on the board in exchange for laurels, but also if the first player got up from the table, went and made him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at that moment. Spoiler alert, he did. And I'm not saying you should always play like that, or if you're even supposed to play like that, but the rules of negotiation are very open and very interesting for favors and what you can do around the course of the game. And boy, do moments like that make for memorable game nights. And again, that's a testament to the qualities of a lot of my favorite games, but none that do it better than Zoo Vadis. It somehow makes these bizarre situations that make for some of the most intense and humorous and unexpected interactions you possibly could have at the table that most games wouldn't create. And it's funny how fast some of these conversations come up out of nowhere while playing. Now, I know Zoo Vadis isn't for everyone. I've experienced that firsthand. And what's interesting is, as horrible as this may sound, those experiences when I played with folks who didn't really enjoy the game, I still had a great time because it's just a good game and it's really entertaining to see how this game can affect different kinds of players and people. And I totally get why it wouldn't be for everyone. But I can tell you, it is the game that I've introduced to maybe the biggest variety of different kinds of players, and the majority have really, really enjoyed it. Gamers and non-gamers alike that have all different kinds of tastes and didn't really know what to expect when coming into this, but they usually had a great time. And you know what? I didn't even mention the fantastic asymmetric player powers that, again, classic Knizia cleverness here, can only be used to benefit other players, never yourself. Hence, another negotiation tool, asymmetry that makes you special and gives you cool powers that you can only use for other people. Absolutely brilliant.
I'm still waiting for my Zoo Vadis expansion with the frog faction that has the leapfrog ability where someone gets to jump a piece ahead, but they have to jump one of their pieces behind. I still think it's a good idea.
Yeah, we'll revisit that another time, Mickey. So yes, my number one favorite Reiner Knizia game of all time, and my favorite board game of all time, Zoo Vadis. And that's that. We hope you've enjoyed our top 25 Reiner Knizia games. Please tell us your thoughts on what Knizia games are your favorites, or if you just have any questions about anything you saw here. Thank you all for your support throughout 2024. We can't wait for you to see what we have in store for 2025, some stuff that you will be seeing even tomorrow. We'll see you next year. Don't forget to always play board games like an animal. How was that? Good?
Not bad at all.
Yeah, so top 25, huh?
Yeah.
To me, it seems a little low.
Well, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, sure. Knizia is extremely prolific. That's what made this list so hard to make.
Well, especially given the fact that there's so many huge Knizia games on the way.
Yeah, I know. I'm very much looking forward to them.
So you're gonna...
All right. We'll do it. See you in 1 year.